This is a silver fox meat rabbit with a beautiful coat. I skinned it with the face on, the ears still intact. Now in this video, I'm going to show you how to clean the hide, a process called fleshing. I use a particular method with rabbits, different than most other animals that I process. And then I'll show you how to dry it. That way it's ready for tanning whenever you want to get to it. Once it's dry, it'll be totally shelf stable. Now, if you don't want to, you don't have to dry the hide. It can go straight into the tan, whatever process you're using for that. I like to bark tan rabbit hides. I really like traditional tanning technologies like bark tanning and brain tanning. However, rabbits are probably the one fur I prefer to bark tan because for whatever reason, rabbits do not take up the brains solution or egg yolks or lecithin or whatever you're using in place of brains. Bet you didn't know there were some substitutes. They don't take up that solution well, but they respond really well to bark tanning. Anyway, this is a gorgeous, mature rabbit pelt. It has nice thick skin, really nice fur. The process of fleshing then drying is called putting up the fur. So here's my method of putting up a rabbit fur. My number one tool for this is actually a primitive tool. This is a very common archaeological find here in America. Probably very common throughout the rest of the world too, I just don't know. This is simply a stone flake, in this case chert, that's had the edge beveled on one side. So all the flakes were taken off downward from that side, resulting in these microdenticulations, also known as teeth. Small, sharp, little grippy teeth. They grip onto the fat and the membrane layers of the rabbit, and they allow you to pull it down. Tools like this will require sharpening. So for that, I have a buckskin pad and an antler tine that's been sharpened to a chisel point. That's able to go in between the teeth and make those valleys deeper, or it's able to take the dulled peak off of a tooth and make it two smaller teeth instead. And for sharpening my bit of antler, I've got this piece of sandstone. As you can see, it has been used quite a bit. It was once more flat. Just through sharpening and abrading stone while flint knapping, it's had this channel carved into it. If you don't know how to butcher and skin a rabbit, I've got a video linked here for you. That video shows you all the steps in the process to get to this point. So from here, what we do is make sure your hide is inside out. This got some straw and stuff on it, but that's okay. All that's going to scrape off. Now, one thing I didn't show in that other video is how to skin the face. The face is the trickiest part. I usually just cut the skin off at the neck. But this was a big, pretty, mature rabbit, so for some reason I decided to save the face too. Once your rabbit skin is inside out, it's actually best to cut it open. We'll very carefully do that along the belly of the rabbit, up between the arms, up to the chin. For that, I'll use my SageSmokeSurvival Bushcraft Knife. I had this knife designed specifically to be a good skinner, while also being great at woodworking and tasks like that that you need in the wilderness. Now I'll show you the real trick to preserving the fur while you cut up the hide. Hold it at the belly. You can see this layer of membrane. These two pieces on the belly have a seam. Cut along that seam. That's going to get you dead center, or pretty close to it. Hold the hide at the bottom of the belly. Insert your knife from the belly side and start cutting it open this way. If I were to go in like this and just rip up, I'll cut through all the fur. By going this way and maneuvering, I can cut just the skin without cutting any of that fur. Now, actual fur buyers prefer case-skinned and fleshed animals. I open up my rabbits and flesh them this way because fleshing them on a beam doesn't seem to work very well. Their skin is just so thin, it's so easy to cut into them. So these days, I never flesh them like I would a deer. You'll know if you're cutting through fur because you'll have a big furry mess. Fur will float through the air everywhere. It's annoying. There we go. There's our rabbit face, the ears. Now there's this spot back here that I haven't opened up yet. So now I'll go back and simply open that up. And that actually gives you a good representation of how much fur you have to work with. Now with our rabbit hide all opened up, I'm going to put it on the knee. That's where we're going to do all our scraping. Make sure your tool is nice and sharp. This actually could use a little touch up. So here's my buckskin pad rolled up. Any patch of leather works just fine. Here's my scraper. Put it upside down. I'll use my chisel point antler here. I'm just taking single flakes off. I use this tool because it genuinely is one of the most efficient tools I've used for the job. Modern alternatives I've seen work are metal file turned up on edge. It has a similar gripping ability of a stone scraper. Maybe a butter knife would work, although I've never tried it. There's my dog Maverick in the background. All right. You want those teeth to feel grippy. That's how you know they're sharp enough. Now then, we'll begin the scraping. Lay the rabbit hide over a bent knee, just like this. I generally start in the middle. You can see my skin is able to drag this membrane over top the skin. My finger's not sliding, it's staying on the same piece of flesh, but that membrane layer is sliding over top the skin. Rabbits have a very thick membrane, and you want to remove a good amount of it in order for it to tan. To start, we do a very gentle slicing motion just to cut the membrane. You can see I'm getting down to that skin. That skin is nice and white. Now, bigger rabbits are harder to flesh. Smaller rabbits, and younger rabbits especially, are easier. Now with that opened up, we can start rolling this off as a sheet. Simply hold your scraper at an angle. Sometimes straight perpendicular is the way to go. Other times, kind of an inward angle works best. And you can see I'm pulling down that layer of membrane that has all the meat and fat on it. What's left is nice, clean skin. You just got to be really careful with that initial slice. It's really easy to give it too much and just go through everything. Flaked tools are incredibly sharp when they're made right. Flakers like this are extremely easy to make. Any flint knapper can do this for you. Now I recognize most people probably don't know any flint knappers, which is a real shame. But like I said, there's some modern alternatives. Like a fresh, sharp file turned up on its edge. That works pretty well. A steel variation of this, if you had a small, thin piece of sheet steel that you could file some very sharp saw teeth into, that would do the job too. Just make sure the teeth are small. We're just going to keep working this whole sheet all the way down the hide. And as you get a little more of a roll, you get some purchase so you can actually grab it and pull it by hand. It really works best to have your knee up. You want your knee to be a hard, curved surface, a lot like a fleshing beam. Nearly every Native American tribe utilized stone or bone fleshers like this in some fashion or another. Many of them, for larger animals, were hafted onto handles so that they could actually hold it like this and chop at a hide that's in a frame. That would peel down that sheet of membrane in the same way. This is just a miniaturized version of that. It takes time, and sometimes you reach spots that are just seemingly impossible to flesh, and just get what you can of the membrane in those areas. And if you're going to a bark tanning process after that, or even an alum tan, which I'm not a fan of, but these days a lot of people do that for rabbit hides, or if you're going with orange bottle tan or any modern chemical solution, just having most of it off is what you need. There we go, I got some purchase on this, and I'm able to pull it. I'll keep on pulling it all the way down. It separates right where it needs to. Check out my bark tanning furs video if you haven't seen that yet. It's a really good reference for the next part of this process. That takes a fresh or dried hide and turns it into something you can make clothing from. Older rabbits are going to be way better for this because they have a lot thicker skin. The very best rabbits are older domestic rabbits that have reached maturity and that are harvested in the middle of winter. That's because they'll have a thick skin and they'll have a prime coat, meaning their fur is going to be nice and dense as it will ever get. Less of that undercoat will be shedding out. It'll just look better too. It'll feel warmer, feel softer, and look better, and it won't shed. So those are the very best rabbits to use. And then the very best breed, in my personal opinion, is the silver fox. In the early to mid 1900s, fox fur was very popular for women's coats, scarves, hats, things like that. That gave rise to a poaching industry on those foxes. The species started to become threatened, and then a man in the 40s, I believe, developed this breed of rabbit, calling it the silver fox because its fur mimicked those foxes. It's got the same black coat and silver ticking, and it greatly reduced the amount of poaching because these rabbit furs were so much cheaper to get. Now I ended up with a couple holes here. Down on this part of the hide, this is the lower portion of it. The skin's just thinner. So if a hole does rip into this, you got to keep working the membrane around it. You can see it's attaching to the bottom of that hole. So go ahead, do your slicing motion there, just to detach it from that hole. That way you can continue peeling it. On those thin areas, definitely just use the scraper. Stop pulling it by hand. I should have been more careful. When you do have pieces of membrane come off, that's chicken food. You can use a little impact with this too, actually chopping down on it. That helps get those stubborn areas. I think it's pretty cool how skin is designed to separate where it needs to for you to be able to tan the hide. I mean, everything could have just developed fusing into each other, so it was really hard to make a separation except with a very sharp knife. But no, there's this distinct separation between muscle and skin, and any muscle that remains on the skin is able to peel off in these big sheets. That's not just with rabbits, that's with pretty much all animals. To me, that says animal skins are meant to be used. That and the fact that we have not been able to mimic the insulative value that they have. Animal fur clothing has a higher insulative value than anything synthetic we can make. It's perfectly designed to be used. Oh, I can hear the vegans descending upon me like locusts. There we go. Got the whole bottom done. Ripped a couple big holes in there. Whoops. That can be sewn up before the tanning process if you want. I got this top sheet still here, so you work that off in the same way, but instead of going towards the bottom of the rabbit, you go towards the top. Now on the sides of the rabbits, you'll know when you hit a nipple because it's hard for the flesh to come off that. Be careful around those spots. You might have to leave a little spot of membrane there because it will otherwise tear through the skin if you're too rough with it. Now with these arms, I go ahead and cut those off and then cut from the armpit to the side of the hide. It adds nothing to have them on. I mean, unless you want a little pencil koozie. There's where the arm was. I'll just put my knife in there and cut out to the edge of the hide. And then it just stretches open and expands the side of the hide. Tough spot here. That is a great pull. Making more chicken food. One other thing worth noting, if your hide starts drying out, if the membrane especially is drying out, you might want to rehydrate it. Now there's some instances where having the membrane just a little dry helps it peel better, but sometimes it really gets in the way of you being able to use the scraper. So if it starts drying out on you, like if you're doing this on a sunny day, go rub some water right into that membrane. Let it sit on the skin for a minute. Try not to get the fur totally submerged because it just takes a long time to dry. That membrane should hydrate back up. Well, there's the camera angle I should have chosen all along. Always keep the skin tight over your knee. Want to pull one way with one hand, scrape the opposite way with your other hand, or even spread the hide, really get some tension on it. Ultimately, you got to develop a feel for how each area needs to be fleshed. So continue the scraping method all the way up the face, work around the ears. That's going to be the hardest part. Just get what you can off. Anything that's not directly a chunk of meat is technically just membrane, and it's going to be okay. You might not get those areas super soft, but you're not going to soften the ears either with that cartilage in there. That cartilage will dry and actually help the ears stand up straight. If you want, you can actually skin the ears, take the cartilage out, but then the ears kind of shrivel up and they lay down flat. Some people like the novelty of having the rabbit ears stand up like rabbit ears. And you can do this for most animals. It can be fun with foxes, coyotes, and raccoons because then you have the ears actually prop up. Once that cartilage dries, it stays preserved, as long as it's not getting wet and dry over and over. Another problem area for tanning on the face is going to be the bed of the whisker follicles. I don't have a better term for that, but it's these fleshy padded areas. There's just a lot of thick membrane there. You want to carve it away. And you can use that same stone scraper for that, just with a gentle sawing motion. It takes a little bit of feel to know how deep you need to go. If you go too deep, the whiskers will pull out through the flesh side. But if you get it just right, you'll have these little white bumps where the whisker follicles end. And that's perfect. If you get down to that follicle bed, it's ready for tanning. Now, if anywhere gets very dry, you can actually start peeling membrane by hand. I don't like doing that over the whole piece because it really increases your chances of ripping the hide with a pelt that's so thin. Once you have all that scraping done, you're ready to tack out the rabbit skin. For this, I just used 3 things, that being a plywood board, a wooden mallet, and some tacks. You can use thin nails in the place of tacks, but tacks are convenient. I found using a mallet to get them into that plywood works a little bit easier. Now what we're going for here is getting a nice large skin. The skin at this stage has a lot of stretch to it. It can easily be stretched in all directions equally. You don't want to stretch it too long and you don't want to stretch it too wide, and you don't want to stretch the whole thing overall too much, or else you'll reduce the density of the fur essentially and make it more likely to rip as it dries. So a little stretching in all directions You don't need it to be drum skin tight. It's going to tighten up as it dries. Using that mallet is really a thumb saver because it's hard to push those tacks through that wood. As you can see, I started with the 4 corners of the rabbit skin. That just helps me visualize what it's going to look like. Then I systematically just work along each side until the whole thing's tacked out. As for the face, you're going to have some topography here. Because the face ultimately terminates around the mouth, it doesn't lay flat. So tack out around the cheeks and the mouth, and then invert the face a little bit so it makes a hump. It's going to dry wrinkly, but that's okay. Once you rehydrate it for tanning, it shouldn't make a difference. Now, I've not done this before with the ears, but what I'm trying is inverting those ears just a little bit so they can dry that way, help that cartilage dry out a little faster. And for a lot of tanning processes, you won't even need to rehydrate that cartilage. You can pretty much just take a warm, damp towel and lay that over top of the skin. Give it an hour like that and it should absorb all the moisture it needs to be pliable and stretchy again. For processes like brain tanning or tanning with other emulsified oils like egg yolks, that's the perfect stage you want it at. And this lets it dry a little faster after the tanning process because you're not saturating all that fur with water. With it all tacked out now, you just put it somewhere to dry. Keep it away from rodents and bugs, so I put it up on a shelf. It's going to take 2 or 3 days. It might take up to a week for those ears to dry out. Depends on your environment. If you're worried about those ears rotting, like if you live somewhere really humid, you can put some borax all around those ears. Just pack it in like salt. That's going to really inhibit bacterial growth. All right, guys, so that's pretty much the basic way I put up rabbit skins for home tanning. I usually don't include the face, but I'm doing it this time because I want to try and preserve some of those rabbit faces. I go to a lot of primitive skills gatherings like rabbit stick, and animal hides with the faces skinned seem to be really sought after. And it makes sense. It lends to a whole lot of creativity. And with any of the fur bearers that I trap, I leave the face on the skin too. I hope this guide has been helpful to you. Follow this process and the skin will be ready for tanning, but shelf stable until you can get to it. And this method goes beyond rabbits too. You can use these tools to flesh the skin of pretty much any fur bearer, although I would recommend just do this with thin-skinned fur bearers like foxes, coyotes, muskrats, just because it's a lot of work to flesh a hide that has a lot of meat and membrane on it with just that little thumb scraper. And the last tip for greasy hides, once you get it fleshed, you're going to want to wash the whole hide really thoroughly with soap and water. Rabbits are not greasy animals. Most of the fat they have comes off with the fleshing, but foxes, coyotes, and especially beavers and raccoons, they're going to be really greasy. So a thorough washing with soap and water is needed to get them ready for home tanning. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to learn more from me, consider joining my membership community, the Sage Smoke Skills Exchange. I teach monthly classes there over Zoom, and the community is actively growing. We all teach and uplift each other. I've made some new friends in it. So the link's below. Check it out if you have an interest. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.